I still remember the chill of that morning, the way the winter air clung to my coat as I climbed the stone steps to Mark's office building. I carried 2 paper cups of coffee in my hands, a small surprise I thought might break through the growing silence in our marriage. We hadn't been talking much lately. Too many late nights, too many excuses about deadlines and conference calls. I told myself it was just stress. That morning, I still believed that. The lobby was quiet except for the echo of my heels on the marble floor. I smiled at the receptionist who gave me a quick nod, her eyes darting away as if she knew something I didn't. My stomach tightened, but I brushed it off. Mark had been working on a big project. Maybe that's why everyone seemed tense. I walked down the hall toward his office, humming softly, rehearsing the playful line I'd say when he saw me with coffee in hand. But when I reached his door, it was already slightly open, and then I froze. Through the gap, I saw Mark. He wasn't at his desk, wasn't on the phone, wasn't looking at spreadsheets. He was holding Claire, his young colleague, the one who always smiled too much at office parties, close against him. Their lips met like they had done it 100 times before. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled, the coffee cups shaking so hard I nearly spilled them on the floor. I wanted to scream, to storm in and demand an explanation, but my body wouldn't move. I stood there, my heart pounding in my ears, my mind screaming one thing: this can't be real. And then I heard her voice, soft but sharp enough to cut through me. I'm tired of hiding, Mark. I'm tired of being the secret. Mark kissed her again, murmuring something I couldn't hear. That was enough. My legs finally moved, carrying me backward, away from the door, away from what I had just seen. I stumbled into the hallway, leaving the coffee cups on the nearest table, hands trembling like they didn't belong to me. Outside, the air was colder than before, biting into my skin as if punishing me for believing in him. I walked fast, then ran, tears blurring my vision. By the time I reached my car, my face was wet and my chest ached like someone had torn it open. That evening, Mark came home, casual as ever, loosening his tie like it was any other day. I stood in the kitchen, waiting numb. He looked at me, confused by my silence. "Lauren, what's wrong?" I stared at him, my voice shaking. "I saw you, Mark. At your office with Claire." His face froze, then hardened. No apology, no guilt, just cold irritation. "I deserve to be happy," he said flatly, as if that excused everything. "We've been stuck for years, Lauren. Maybe it's time we both moved on." Something inside me snapped. I grabbed my suitcase from the closet, half-packed from a weekend trip I never took, and began stuffing clothes into it. Mark didn't stop me. He didn't say a single word as I walked out into the rain, my suitcase bumping against the wet pavement. I drove aimlessly, headlights cutting through sheets of water, until instinct took me to Chloe Hart's coffee shop. She was more than my best friend. She was my safe place. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, soaked and shaking. Chloe's eyes widened. "Lauren, what happened?" I couldn't answer. "Not yet." She wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "You don't have to say it." "I know." I sat there for hours, drinking warm tea, staring at nothing. When Chloe finally spoke again, her voice was firm but kind. "You need to get away, just for a little while. Clear your head. I have a ticket, a getaway you can use. No arguments." I nodded because I had nothing left to fight with. I thought leaving would be temporary, just long enough to forget the look on Mark's face, but I had no idea that one decision, that one trip, would change everything forever. People always said I was lucky. I had a steady job at the local bank in Burlington, a cozy little house near Lake Champlain, and a husband who, at least from the outside, seemed dependable. Mark and I had been married for 5 years. 5 years of dinner dates that slowly became takeout in front of separate screens. 5 years of planning for a family that never happened. I wanted children more than anything. A little boy who had Mark's serious eyes, or a little girl who inherited my laugh. We tried, But month after month, the test stayed negative. I told myself it wasn't the end of the world, that our time would come. Mark was different, though. He'd shrug off every disappointment, burying himself deeper into work. "We'll figure it out later," he said, always later. When we first bought the house, we painted the smallest bedroom a pale yellow, just in case, I said. Over the years, the crib I once browsed online stayed a saved item in my cart, never ordered. The yellow room turned into a storage space, stacked with Mark's old computer parts and half-finished projects. It was a quiet kind of heartbreak, one I carried alone because Mark didn't like to talk about feelings. I blamed myself for the growing distance. Maybe I wasn't exciting enough. Maybe I worked too many hours. I started cooking elaborate dinners, leaving little notes on the fridge, trying to make him smile again. He'd thank me, but his eyes were elsewhere, always elsewhere. Still, I believed we were okay. We had routines, Sunday pancakes, walks along Church Street when the leaves turned orange in fall, quiet nights by the fireplace. People on the outside would have said we looked happy, and sometimes I thought so too. That morning when I carried coffee to his office, I wasn't thinking about betrayal. I was thinking about us, about how maybe something small could fix whatever had cracked between us. I told myself we just needed a spark. But when I saw him with Claire, that tiny spark blew out like a candle in the wind. All those little moments we'd built over 5 years didn't just fade, they shattered. And in their place was a silence I couldn't explain, an emptiness I couldn't fill. That's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't always come with warning signs. Sometimes it's just one moment, one image burned into your mind, and you know nothing will ever be the same. That night at Chloe's cafe, with rain dripping from my hair and hands trembling around a cup of tea, I thought about all of it, the house, the yellow room, the dreams we never had a chance to hold. I thought about how quickly life can change, and how I had no idea it was about to change even more. Chloe's cafe had always been my safe place. That night, with my suitcase by my feet and my heart shattered into pieces, it felt like a lifeboat in the middle of a storm. She didn't ask many questions. She just sat with me, holding my hand until the tears slowed. When she finally spoke, her voice carried that steady kindness I had always counted on. "You need to get out of here, Lauren. Just for a while. Somewhere quiet, somewhere new." I shook my head. "I can't. I have work, my mom. Your mom is safe with her neighbor checking in every day. And your work will survive without you for 1 week. You can't keep breathing in the same air as him right now. It's toxic." She reached into her bag and slid an envelope across the table. A weekend getaway voucher. Maine Coast. I was saving it, but you need it more than I do. Don't argue. I stared at her. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "You need space to think, and maybe to remember who you are without him." The next morning, I packed the bare minimum. Jeans, a few shirts, toiletries. I booked a bus because the idea of driving felt overwhelming. Everything inside me felt heavy, like even simple decisions hurt. But I told myself Chloe was right, I needed to breathe. The bus was half full when I boarded. I sat by the window, watching Burlington fade behind me as winter, trees, blurred past. For the first time since the night I left Mark, I felt a fragile sort of relief. He couldn't reach me here. The house, the yellow room, even the memory of Claire's lipstick on his collar. Those things were behind me, at least for a while. An hour into the trip, snow began to fall. At first, it was light, soft flakes drifting against the window, but soon it thickened, turning the road white. The bus slowed as the driver announced through the intercom, "Folks, it might get a little rough through the mountain pass. Sit tight." I tightened my seatbelt and tried to relax, but my chest felt tight. Outside, the world had vanished into swirling white. Every curve of the road felt sharper than it should, every bump heavier. I told myself it was fine, that buses traveled this route every day, but then I saw the driver's knuckles whiten around the steering wheel. We rounded a bend, and everything happened at once. The tires lost grip, the bus swerved hard to the right, and someone screamed. I grabbed the seat in front of me as the bus tilted, a sickening lurch pulling me sideways. Metal groaned, glass shattered, and we were sliding down a slope I couldn't see through the snow. My head slammed against the window. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and I tasted blood in my mouth. Someone shouted something, maybe a prayer, maybe a name, but it was drowned out by the roar of twisting metal and the shattering impact as we hit something solid. Then silence. When I opened my eyes, everything was sideways. The aisle was the ceiling was the floor, and people were groaning, crying, calling out. My seatbelt dug into my shoulder as I tried to move. My hands shook as I fumbled for the clasp. Help! Somebody help me! The voice was faint, maybe behind me, but I couldn't see. I crawled, glass crunching under my hands, pain stabbing my leg. My vision blurred, then darkened. Somewhere far away, someone was yelling to stay awake, but it felt like falling into deep water, my body sinking where nothing could touch me. The last thing I remembered was the cold, sharp and biting, wrapping around me like a warning. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I expected flashing lights, paramedics, maybe the sterile brightness of a hospital room. Instead, there was soft firelight flickering across rough wooden walls. The air smelled faintly of pine and smoke, and the blankets around me were thick wool, scratchy against my skin. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. My head throbbed, my leg ached, and when I tried to sit up, a sharp pain shot through my ribs. I gasped and froze. That's when I heard footsteps, a steady, heavy rhythm, and a man appeared in the doorway. He was tall, maybe in his late 40s, with graying hair under a cap and eyes the color of storm clouds. His clothes were simple, flannel shirt, worn jeans, boots caked with mud. He carried a kettle in one hand and a first aid kit in the other. "You're awake," he said, his voice calm but deep, almost rough from disuse. "Don't try to move too fast. You hit your head pretty hard." I blinked at him, disoriented. Where am I? "My cabin, Green Mountain National Forest," he said, setting the kettle on a small wood stove. "You were thrown from a bus near the ridge. Found you by the stream, unconscious and half buried in snow. Lucky you didn't freeze before I got to you." His words hit me like ice water. The bus, the screaming, the slide down the slope. My chest tightened. The others. He shook his head slowly. "Search and rescue came for them. I stayed back with you because you were too banged up to move far. There was no cell service last night, and by the time I got back, they were gone. They think you didn't make it." I stared at him, my voice caught in my throat. "So they think I'm dead?" "For now," he said, crouching beside me. "We can clear that up later. First, you need to heal." It should have scared me that a stranger had me alone in his cabin, that the world thought I was gone, but his eyes held no threat. They held something else, a weariness I recognized. He had known loss. I could see it etched in the lines on his face. "Who are you?" I whispered. "Henry Lawson," he said simply, wrapping a bandage around my bruised wrist. "Used to teach history at UVM before I decided I liked trees better than people." Something in the way he said it made me pause. This was a man who had stepped out of the world, not because he couldn't survive it, but because he didn't want to. Days blurred together after that. Henry moved with quiet efficiency, cooking simple meals, keeping the fire alive, checking my bandages. My leg was swollen and stiff, and even small movements sent shocks of pain through me. I hated feeling helpless, hated depending on someone I had just met. One afternoon, as he helped me to a chair by the window, I snapped, "You don't have to babysit me. I can manage." He looked at me, unflinching. "I know you want to be strong, but right now, being alive is strong enough." I turned my face to the window, tears stinging my eyes. Outside, the world was nothing but snow and trees, a silent expanse that felt both beautiful and terrifying. I thought about Burlington, about Mark and Claire, and the house that wasn't home anymore. About how, for all I knew, nobody was even looking for me. At night, I woke from dreams of crashing metal and Mark's cold voice saying, "I deserve to be happy." I'd sit by the fire, clutching the blanket, until Henry came out of his small room, wordless, just handing me a cup of tea like he knew without asking. "Do you always take in strangers from the snow?" I asked one night, trying to break the silence. He gave a faint smile, the first I'd seen on him. "Only the ones who look like they've forgotten how to breathe." There was something about the way he said it, like he knew exactly how that felt. And maybe he did. Weeks passed. My injuries healed slowly, but my mind stayed tangled, knotted with anger and grief. Yet, in that isolation, without phones or deadlines or Mark's shadow hanging over me, something started to shift. I noticed small things, the way snow on the trees sparkled when the sun hit, the sound of wind through the pines like a distant ocean, the rhythm of chopping wood in the morning. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was performing. I was just existing, and it was enough. I didn't know it then, but this cabin, this stranger named Henry, and this silence were about to change the way I saw everything, including myself. If someone had told me I would spend nearly a year hidden away in the Green Mountains with a man I'd never met before, I would have laughed. But time in Henry Lawson's cabin didn't move the way it did anywhere else. Days slid into weeks, and weeks blurred into months, the outside world growing distant, almost unreal, as if it belonged to another life. At first, I thought only about leaving. The moment I could walk without pain, I promised myself I would find a way down the mountain and back to Burlington. But the thought of returning to what I had left behind brought no comfort. A husband who had kissed another woman like I didn't exist. A home that felt cold even before I walked out its door. Every time I pictured Burlington, my chest tightened, so I stayed silent, telling myself I just needed a little more time to heal. Henry never pried. He fixed things around the cabin, tended the woodpile, and moved through each day with a steady patience that made the silence feel less heavy. I tried to fill it with distractions, but there was nowhere to hide, not from the thoughts I had buried for years, and not from the ache I carried like an open wound. One night, as he set a steaming cup of tea in front of me, Henry said quietly, "People who come up here usually run from something." His voice was calm, without judgment, as if it were just an observation. I stared into the cup, watching the steam rise, unsure whether I wanted to answer. "From a man who forgot I was his wife," I whispered at last. He nodded, just once, like he understood everything without another word. The days followed a rhythm I hadn't known I needed. We woke with the sunrise, gathered water from the creek, cooked simple meals on the wood stove. Henry taught me how to split logs, how to keep a fire alive through the night, how to listen for the subtle change in wind that meant a storm was coming. At first, I resisted the unfamiliar chores, missing the easy conveniences of my old life. Delivery dinners, warm showers, the glow of my phone's screen filling the silence. But slowly, the silence stopped feeling like emptiness and started to feel like space I had never given myself to think, to breathe, to exist without pretending. In those long, quiet evenings by the fire, I began to see my old life clearly for the first time. I had built everything around a man who barely looked at me anymore, filling the gaps with optimism that never quite landed. I told myself marriage was supposed to be hard, that love meant staying even when it hurt. But love wasn't what I'd been protecting. It was the idea of love, the comfort of routine, even when it left me lonely in my own home. The truth hurt, but it also set something free inside me. For once, I let myself cry without holding back, and Henry never asked why. He just handed me a worn blanket and let me grieve in peace. Midway through the summer, Henry collapsed while chopping wood, the axe slipping from his hand as he crumpled to the ground. Panic shot through me, cold and sharp. I rushed to his side, checking his breathing, whispering his name like it was a lifeline. He tried to brush me off with a weak smile, but I wouldn't hear it. I dragged him inside, forced him to lie down, and spent days nursing him through a harsh bout of pneumonia. I stayed awake listening to his labored breathing, feeding him soup when he could barely sit up, reading from one of his old history books just to fill the silence so he wouldn't slip away. Somewhere in those sleepless nights, I changed. I wasn't the woman who had sat in Chloe's cafe, trembling with shock and heartbreak. I was someone who could hold another life together, even when mine felt like it was still in pieces. When Henry finally recovered, sitting up on his own and teasing me for being so bossy, he looked at me differently, not with gratitude alone, but with a quiet pride. "You don't belong here, Lauren," he said softly one evening as we watched the first orange leaves fall. "This place, it's for ghosts, and you're not one anymore." I wanted to argue, to say I still didn't know who I was or where I belonged. But deep down I knew he was right. The mountains had held me like a cocoon. But cocoons aren't meant to last forever. By autumn, I was strong again, walking easily, splitting with myself, carrying water without spilling it all over my boots. More importantly, I could think of Mark without my stomach twisting into knots. I no longer wanted revenge, not in the way I once imagined. I wanted freedom, freedom from his betrayal, freedom from the hollow version of myself I had been. One crisp morning, Henry handed me a small, weathered journal. "You're heading back soon," he said. "Write down what you've learned here. Don't forget how it feels to start over." That night, I filled its pages with everything: my grief, my anger, the strange comfort of silence, and the way kindness could come from a stranger in a cabin. When I closed it, I knew it was time. Henry didn't try to stop me. He stood by the doorway as I packed, nodding once when I thanked him, his voice quiet but firm. "Go live your life, Lauren. The world's still out there, waiting for you." The morning I left, the forest was washed in gold. I hiked down the narrow trail, each step heavy and light all at once. My chest felt hollow, but not in the way it had months ago. It felt open, ready for something new. I looked back once, catching sight of Henry's figure in the doorway, hand raised in silent farewell. Then I turned and kept walking, toward a life I didn't yet know, but one I was finally ready to face. The road back to Burlington felt unreal, like traveling into someone else's memory. For months, the world had been nothing but trees, firelight, and Henry's quiet voice telling me which herbs were safe to drink as tea and which ones would make me sick. Now, pavement stretched ahead, lined with gas stations and billboards, the hum of traffic replacing the wind through pines. I stopped at Chloe's cafe first. The moment she saw me step through the door, her eyes widened and her hand flew to her mouth. "Lauren? Oh my God, you're alive!" She rushed around the counter and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. The news said there were no survivors. They held a memorial, Lauren, for you. Her words hit harder than I expected. People thought I had died. My mother thought I had died. And no one had tried to find me beyond that first search. I was a ghost returning to a life that had already mourned me. "Where's my mom?" I asked, suddenly uneasy. Chloe's expression shifted, a shadow passing over her face. "That's complicated. She's not at the house." "What do you mean she's not at the house?" "She's at a facility. Mark said she needed more care than he could give after your accident. Something about signing over the house to afford it." A cold chill ran through me. "Signing over what?" Chloe hesitated, then pulled out her phone and showed me a picture she'd taken weeks earlier. Strangers walking up my front steps, carrying furniture. My mother's furniture. My furniture. The world tilted. I gripped the counter, trying to stay upright. "Where is she?" I whispered. Chloe gave me the address, and within an hour I was standing outside a building that looked more like a warehouse than a care facility. The smell of bleach hit me before I even walked inside. My mother was in a small, sterile room, her body thin, her eyes dull, like she hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. When she looked up and saw me, she blinked, confused at first, then burst into tears. "I thought you were dead," she whispered, clutching my hands. "Mark said you were gone, that there was nothing left for him here. He said this was best for me. I held her and felt something deep in me harden. Mark hadn't just betrayed me. He had exploited my supposed death to strip us of everything. He'd sold the house I grew up in, the one place that still felt safe, and abandoned my mother in a place that felt like a waiting room for death. The nurse came in, startled to see me. We didn't know you were alive," she stammered. "Your husband said." "He's not my husband." I cut in sharply. "Not anymore." That night, I signed the discharge papers and brought my mother to Chloe's place temporarily. As I helped her settle into bed, she whispered, "Why would he do this, Lauren?" Her voice cracked like a child's. "Because he thought he could," I said, brushing her hair back gently. "But he won't get away with it." I didn't sleep. I sat at Chloe's kitchen table with my journal open, Henry's voice echoing in my mind. "Write down what you've learned before you forget what it feels like to start over." But this wasn't about starting over. It was about reclaiming what never should have been taken. The next morning, I met Andrew Carter, a lawyer Chloe recommended. He was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes that took in every detail but softened when he spoke. After I told him everything, Mark's affair, the fake story about my death, the property transfer, Andrew leaned back in his chair and said, "We'll get it back. It won't be easy, but he's left a trail a mile wide." For the first time since leaving the cabin, I felt something new stirring in me, not rage, but resolve. I had learned how to chop wood, how to survive on almost nothing, how to care for another person when their life was in my hands. I could handle a courtroom. I could face Mark. When I finally saw him again, it wasn't at home or in a cafe or anywhere familiar. It was across a table in Andrew's office during a mandatory mediation session. Mark looked shocked, pale even, like he'd seen a ghost, which in a way he had. "Lauren," he breathed, his voice unsteady. I stared back at him, my voice steady as stone. "You stole from me. You abandoned my mother. And you thought no one would ever hold you accountable. You were wrong." He opened his mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to justify, but I didn't let him speak. For months, I had been silent in our marriage, holding back my pain and pretending everything was fine. "Not anymore. This ends now," I said. "All of it." And for the first time in years, I meant every word. Andrew Carter moved fast. Within days, he had filed suit to challenge the property transfer Mark had pushed through while I was presumed dead. "This is fraud," Andrew said bluntly as we sat in his office going over documents. "You were never declared legally dead, and even if you had been, he had no right to pressure your mother into signing over her home. We'll also push for damages." I listened, pen tapping nervously against my knee. "He's going to fight this, isn't he?" Andrew nodded. "Probably. Men like him don't admit wrongdoing. They double down. But don't worry. I'm good at peeling back masks." The first hearing was surreal. Mark sat on the opposite side of the courtroom, looking smaller than I remembered. His once perfectly pressed suits were wrinkled. His confident posture sagged just slightly. And next to him was Claire, still clinging to his arm, but with eyes darting nervously around the room. When the judge entered, everyone stood, then sat, and the proceedings began. Andrew was calm and precise, presenting evidence like a man drawing a map straight through enemy territory. He showed the timeline, the bus crash, the rushed property transfer, the facility that had no legitimate reason to take my mother in except for Mark's false statements about her condition. He even had copies of emails Mark sent to realtors bragging about liquidating assets. Mark's attorney tried to spin it as an act of compassion, arguing that Mark was overwhelmed and trying to secure better care for my mother. But when the judge asked directly, "Did you confirm your wife's death with any official authority before transferring her property?" Mark had no answer. His mouth opened, then closed again, like a man realizing too late that there was no way out. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers. I looked at Mark, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I had married. I didn't even see the man who betrayed me. I saw someone who had built his life on shortcuts, someone so sure no one would ever call him out that he'd grown careless and now it was all unraveling. When I took the stand, my hands trembled at first, but then I thought of Henry's quiet strength, the way he said I wasn't a ghost anymore. I told the court everything. The betrayal, the bus crash, waking up in a cabin while the world thought I was gone, and coming home to find my mother abandoned. My voice grew stronger with every word. Mark refused to look at me as I testified. He stared at the table, his jaw tight, while Claire fidgeted beside him. By the second week of hearings, the cracks in Mark's defense widened. A former neighbor of my mother testified how she saw Mark loading furniture into a moving truck 2 days after the accident. A nurse from the facility admitted under oath that Mark said I had no living relatives able to care for his mother-in-law, and that he needed to secure her assets before creditors stepped in. Every lie he told became another nail in his case. Finally, the judge ruled. The property transfer was null and void. All proceeds from the sale had to be returned, and Mark was ordered to pay damages for emotional and financial harm. I felt my knees go weak, but Andrew's hand on my shoulder grounded me. "We won," he whispered. Mark stood there, pale and speechless, as if the air had been sucked out of him. Claire let go of his arm, muttered something under her breath, and walked out before the judge even left the bench. As people filed out of the courtroom, Mark finally looked at me. His eyes were red, maybe from anger, maybe from shame. "Lauren," he said softly, almost pleading. I stepped closer, but not out of compassion, out of finality. "You had everything," I said quietly. "A wife, a home, someone who believed in you, even when you didn't deserve it. And you destroyed it all because you thought you could get away with it." He tried to speak again, but I cut him off, my voice steady and clear. "This is where it ends. I don't hate you, Mark, not anymore. But I will never forgive what you did to my mother." His shoulders slumped, and for once there was no arrogance left in him, only silence. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked questions, but I ignored them. This wasn't about headlines. This was about finally closing a door that should have been shut long ago. That night, back at Chloe's cafe, I sat with my mother, who smiled for the first time in months. "You look lighter," she said softly. "I am," I told her, and for the first time I truly believed it. The first morning after the ruling felt strangely quiet. No court dates looming, no lawyers calling, no restless nights rehearsing what I'd say when facing Mark again. Just silence. Not the heavy kind I'd lived with for years, but the soft kind I'd learned to love in the mountains. I moved my mother back into Chloe's guest room for a few weeks while we figured out the next step. She was weaker than before, but her eyes brightened every day as if she'd been pulled out of a shadow. "It feels like I'm waking up," she said one evening as we sat drinking tea by Chloe's kitchen window. "Like I was gone for a long time and didn't even know it." "You weren't the only one," I whispered, squeezing her hand. "But we're both awake now." Andrew Carter checked in more than any lawyer had to, bringing over papers for me to sign and groceries when I forgot to shop. At first, I thought it was just kindness, but there was something in the way he lingered, asking how I was holding up, listening without rushing to fill the silence. He'd been through his own divorce, one that left scars you couldn't see, and there was an unspoken understanding between us. One evening, after my mother had gone to bed and Chloe had closed up her cafe, Andrew and I sat outside under the porch light. The air smelled like rain, and the sound of distant traffic hummed softly against the night. "You know," he said, looking at me with that calm, steady gaze, "you could stay angry forever and no one would blame you. But you didn't. You chose to fight for what mattered without letting it poison you." I smiled faintly. I had enough poison already. I didn't want to carry it any longer. Andrew nodded, then leaned back, hands in his pockets. "That's rare, Lauren. Most people can't let go." I looked at him, the porch light casting a soft halo around his hair. I had help, someone who reminded me I wasn't a ghost anymore. Henry. I thought about him often, the way he quietly taught me how to live differently, how to breathe without fear, how to let the silence teach me instead of suffocate me. I sent him a letter the week after the ruling, telling him everything about my mother, the court case, and how I had started to feel alive again. I didn't expect a reply, but one came anyway. It was short and written in neat, careful script. Proud of you. Told you the world was still out there. Live it. I cried when I read it, but they were good tears, cleansing tears. Months passed, and life slowly took shape again. My mother's health improved once she returned to familiar surroundings, and we decided to buy back a small house near the lake, a place with enough sunlight for her plants and a spare room for me when I visited. She often said, "This feels like home again," and I knew she meant more than just the walls and roof. As for me, I went back to work at the bank, but something had changed. I no longer let every little stress eat at me. I set boundaries. I took walks on my lunch breaks. I stopped apologizing for existing. The yellow rune from my old house, that symbol of everything we hadn't built, was gone, and I didn't mourn it. I was building something new instead. Andrew and I grew closer, slowly without rush or expectation. It started with long conversations over coffee, then weekend walks along the waterfront, then dinners where laughter came easily. He wasn't trying to save me, and I wasn't trying to fill a void. We were simply two people who had known pain and had chosen, separately, to keep living anyway. The night he asked me to dinner at his place felt different, intentional. After a simple meal, we sat by the fireplace, and he handed me a small velvet box. "I know we've both been through enough to be careful," he said softly, "but I also know I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. Marry me, Lauren." Tears filled my eyes before I even opened the box. "Yes," I whispered, my voice trembling but sure. "Yes, I will." We had a small wedding in Chloe's garden that spring. My mother, radiant in soft blue, walked with me down the aisle while holding my arm for balance. Chloe cried. Andrew cried. Even the minister looked misty-eyed. And Henry, though he wasn't there, had sent a letter we read aloud. Love doesn't always come the way we expect, but when it does, it's worth every mile we had to walk alone to find it. Wishing you joy, Henry Lawson. When the vows were said and the rings exchanged, Andrew kissed me under a sky so clear it felt like the mountains had followed me here, watching and approving. Months later, I sat by a window in our small new home, cradling my newborn son. He was warm and perfect, his tiny fingers curling around mine like he already knew I was his safe place. We named him Henry George Mitchell Carter in honor of the man who had saved me when I couldn't save myself. As sunlight poured through the window, I whispered to my sleeping son, "You're proof that life doesn't end when everything falls apart. It just begins again, different and sometimes even better." I often think back to the woman I was when I boarded that bus, scared, lost, clinging to a life that was already broken. I barely recognize her now. The mountains gave me quiet, Henry gave me perspective, and losing everything gave me the chance to choose differently. There's a journal I keep on my nightstand, its pages filled with memories of those days in the cabin. The cold mornings, the smell of pine, Henry's voice telling me the world was still out there. And when life feels too heavy again, I open it and remember, I'm not a ghost anymore. I'm alive. And this home, this family, this love, this is mine.